And it is a handheld console about the size of the original Game Boy, and it can do so much. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of it. It has been out a little while, but it is hard to get, and it isn't the cheapest thing in the world. So in today's deep dive, we're going to work out if this is pocket perfection, or is it just handheld hype? This unassuming little device can not only play original Game Boy cartridges, but it can play games designed for the Game Boy Color, it can play games designed for the Game Boy Advance, and if you get adapters like we have here, then of course you can get it to play games that were designed for the Sega Game Gear, for the Turbo Grafx, I don't have one of them, or even for the Atari Lynx. And that's not all, because you can put games onto this via the SD card slot, and then you can get it to play a lot more games. So without further ado, let's deep dive in. The Analogue Pocket is a device which has been available for a couple of years now. Despite this, it still has the vibe of being a new console for so many, as it is not a console you can just pick up in any gaming store or purchase online on Amazon. For me, getting an Analogue Pocket as we kick off 2024 was the culmination of a lot of curiosity about the device, combined with the right price on a second-hand system. For regular viewers of the Geek Battle Gaming YouTube channel, you'll know I often do hardware reviews and deep dives, and that I love to tangle with as many devices that focus on modern retro gaming as I can get my hands on. The Analogue Pocket ticks both those boxes. So let's get into it. So I'll just say a quick note, if you haven't done so already, I would appreciate if you would smash that subscribe button. And with that plug out the way, let's get into the meaty nitty gritty of the Analogue Pocket, and should you have one in 2024 and beyond. Now in this video, we'll explore if the Pocket is great to have in 2024, what accessories are available for it, like the Analogue Pocket dock and the Game Gear adapter, what controllers you can use for it, the emulation on the device, performance of original carts, and so much more. Now, whether you were like me and was curious about getting the Analogue Pocket, or perhaps you already have one, I hope my exploration of the console gives you insight into what you can get out of the portable little wonder that it is, and will get you excited to do some high quality gaming on the go. To start things off, let's go over what the Analogue Pocket is, as we also try to work out if it's for you. The system is a pocket games console that looks very much like the original Nintendo Game Boy. Design-wise, it's a similar size to the OG Game Boy, but has a look that is slightly more like the Game Boy Pocket. The system isn't as thick as the original Game Boy, and the top half of the system, where the screen is significantly thinner, as there isn't an extra bit of plastic to protect and hold in the cartridges, but more on that later. The screen is much larger than the original Game Boy, and is for many one of the main focuses of the system. It's a 3.5 inch screen with a 1600 by 1440 pixels resolution. Now, if you don't know what this means, basically, it is that it is 10 times the resolution of the original Game Boy. And oh boy, does this produce a good image. The true glory of this screen is that you get to see your original Game Boy cartridges and Game Gear cartridges appear much clearer than they ever did back in the day on the original hardware. The images are clean and clear and don't have the ghosting issue, which was a thing on the OG Shades of Green Game Boy. Now, the system also allows you to use a number of filters and display options to customize the experience in all kinds of wonderful ways. This allows you to choose if the screen has the look of the original Game Boy, the Game Boy Color, or the Game Boy Advance, or a bunch of other options, such as one that makes all games look like you're playing it on a Virtual Boy, or just something that gives you the best possible image that the hardware can produce. You can then choose to have filters that change the display to grayscale, mint, blue, green or purple. Now, these are fun names because what is mint? Yes, it's a little bit green, and some of these will make things look like they would look if you were playing them on the Super Game Boy, with some of the graphics getting a couple of colours added. The screen is like the original Game Boys rather than the later released Game Boy Advance in its aspect ratio, so it means that Game Boy Advance games will display with a black bar at the top and the bottom of the screen, as that was a more widescreen display. So the sound of the console is also crystal clear, and when turned up it is actually really loud. It's good that you have the option to turn things up that loud, but I can't imagine that many people will have their analog pockets turned all the way up all the time. Now, there is a built-in music maker, so although this isn't something I've explored on the console as yet, maybe the high volume level is a benefit of this feature. So when you switch on the system, it's kind of underwhelming. You get the Analogue logo and you get the logo for FPGA, which is something I'll explain more later and why you should care about it. But then you get the main menu, which is a black screen with white text. Now, with me having this at the start of 2024, things may be different than it would have been when it was first launched, and I'm sure it will be at least slightly different in the future when there are more updates for the system. But as it is now, you get the option to play cartridges, check your library, the OpenFPGA bit, then your memories, tools and settings. Let's break down what each of these are and why you should care. Play cartridge is exactly what it says on the tin, as they'd say on the old Ron Seal adverts. So you go onto it and you get to load up your cartridge. Bada bing, bada boom. Library shows a list of all of the cartridges you've played on your Analogue Pocket so far. Now, when you put in a cart and choose play cartridge, you are first presented with some info on the game inserted. So literally pressing play cartridge does bring you to another screen before it plays the cartridge. But you do have the option to add a game to your library. Now, this isn't as exciting as you may imagine. No, it doesn't let you rip the ROM and then play it later without the cartridge inserted. That would be an incredible feature, and it wouldn't surprise me if someone didn't devise a way for this to be done in the future. And look, if it's not possible ever to be done on the Analogue Pocket, I think something will allow you to do that in the future, even if it's a different console or a revised version. Look, it's nice that there is this feature that lets you add games to your library, and it does then show you when you added the game with the time and the date that you added it to the library, but I'd like to see a little bit more here. Just like you can on some Nintendo consoles, I'd like it to keep a record of how long you have played each cartridge. I think that'd be a cool way to keep track just of which games you like to play most. Then the OpenFPGA is where a lot of Analogue Pocket users will spend most, if not all, of their time with the system. In a feature that wasn't present when the console first launched, it has since been added that users can develop cores for various home consoles, home computers and handheld consoles to be able to run on the Analogue Pocket. So as it is, the console I have has a large memory card with cores that will run various games consoles and computers like the Amiga, the Atari 2600, the Atari 7800, the ColecoVision, Intellivision, Sega Master System, Sega Mega Drive, NES, Super Nintendo, PC Engine, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Game Gear, Supervision, WonderSwan, Neo Geo, and some more. Now, that is a pretty impressive list. Oh, and also arcade games. Like, honestly, it can do everything up to about PS1, but when I say about PS1, it does have the option, and I know some people have got some PS1 stuff to work on this, but generally PS1 is the cutoff point of where it doesn't really work. I've seen some people get some PS1 stuff working with some slowdown or with some issues, so realistically, whilst you can get some arcade games running on here, and then you can get some consoles running on here, you're kind of looking at things up to the Super Nintendo and Mega Drive, which still gives you access to thousands and thousands of games. So I'm not really complaining. But whilst this functionality does make the console an excellent portable console to have any and all of your classic games on there, there are a couple of things to be aware of. You currently can't use save states on the ROMs loaded with the cores on all systems. As it is, you can on Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance and Game Gear, as you can do save states on the games that you plug in with cartridges of these same systems. Now, you can save by pressing the analog button and up at the same time if you don't know that, and then either it will tell you that a game was saved or tell you that one was not supported. So at least it's pretty straight to the point if you go to do a save state on, say, a Super Nintendo game and it's not supported. If it's supported in the future and you just need to update your system, then this will be an indicator that you need to update your system. Now, as it is, save states come up in your memories. That's what it means. It's basically where you can load your save states if you have the cartridge inserted, because it will ask you for it. And you can have 128 save states saved at any one time. You do have the option to change filters, remap controls, and other things like change to using square pixels, which improves how some consoles are displayed when using the emulator cores. And again, I know I'm saying emulator, but that's just because that's the term that everyone understands, but we'll get on to what the FPGA thing means properly now. So, coming back to the FPGA thing, it stands for Field Programmable Gate Array. And I get it, most of you don't know what that means. Heck, I don't really know what that means. But basically what it does mean is it's a type of circuit which is in the console and other devices which are made with FPGA technology, and it means that they can be reprogrammed after it's released. That means that the tech boffins are able to get this hardware and make it think that it's various other consoles. So it doesn't just use software which runs games from other hardware, the actual hardware itself thinks it's these other consoles. I don't quite understand it, but I know it's something that people think is cool. So, here's the thing. Does this FPGA technology matter and make any real difference compared to if you just had one of those emulation handhelds that you see all over the place on Amazon and eBay? Things like the Anbanic consoles or the Miu Mini Plus, or even something like the Evercade, which is a console with licensed cartridges which also uses emulation. Is this any better than that at all? Well, truthfully, not especially. And I know some people will think that is sacrilege for me to say, but speaking to the majority of people that may pick up a Analogue Pocket or may pick up a Miu Mini Plus or an Evercade or a Steam Deck or played an emulated game on the Switch, if you're playing the game, it's kind of the same game. It won't change things so radically that you'll notice a big difference. If you have an emulation device and you're playing Super Mario Land on it, the performance you'll get out of the Analogue Pocket, whether you're using your original cart or a ROM, is going to be pretty much the same thing, and that is playing Super Mario Land. So, look, an NES game on the Evercade isn't going to play any real different, broadly speaking, than if you play it on the Analogue Pocket. The difference is somewhat down to a couple of things. So, if you buy an Evercade cartridge, it will have a select number of games on it, and these are officially licensed, and so you are supporting the rights holders to the older games you want to play. Using original carts on the Analogue Pocket is going to be a second-hand cartridge for the most part, so whilst they are officially licensed, they're also original carts which may be 25 or 30 years old, and so won't do anything new to support the license holders in 2024 and beyond. But then again, it shouldn't have to. If you own the original cart, then they have already been paid for back in the day. In terms of emulation, the Analogue Pocket will perhaps give you a way to experience games of carts that you either have and no longer work, or the chance to play these games are unlikely to ever come up officially ever again. Say I want to play the Game Boy original WCW wrestling game, it's a safe bet that something like that will never find its way onto the Evercade or the Nintendo eShop. Anything that's got a license and is a sports game basically isn't going to get re-released as it was back in the day. So, emulation and something like the Analogue Pocket or the Miu Mini Plus is going to be the only way you can experience them. As spoken about in my recent review of the Retron 5, 87% of all games that have ever been made are no longer available to purchase either as carts, discs, or even downloads. The Pocket is a great device in terms of games preservation, as it gives a way to play cartridges of certain systems, and is a portable way to play games from many systems in a way that improves on how the games were ever originally playable. The cost of the Analogue Pocket is high though, and the accessories make it even more expensive. As a comparison, the Analogue Pocket costs around the same or even more than you may pay for your average Nintendo Switch Lite. And because of the niche nature of the product, you can only get it directly from Analogue or get it secondhand from places like eBay, and then there'll be cost of shipping, and like me, if you're in the UK or basically outside of the US, you should expect to pay a pretty penny for the shipping. And you'll also have to probably wait a while for it to get in your hands. Some people had to wait a long time, and depending how many they've got made or in stock, the waiting time can be a while, and that's why secondhand is sometimes the quicker and easier way to get it. But you may find that you're paying over the odds doing it this way. So you have to question, is this the best option for you? That will depend what you want and what your budget is. If you want to play original Game Boy carts, this is a fantastic way to play them in great quality, but truthfully doesn't give a performance of the games, which I think noticeably makes it so much better than playing the games on emulation devices. Tetris will still be Tetris after all. You may want to have your original Pokemon cartridge with the original save, but otherwise I'd say, for me at least, other devices will give you the same games. I'm sorry to have to say that. I know some people are so into the culture of having this and that great screen, but to me, Tetris is Tetris, Super Mario Land is Super Mario Land, and Sonic the Hedgehog is Sonic the Hedgehog. Look, I don't go into all of the details of, well, this frame dropped here, and this aspect ratio is slightly out. As long as I can play the games, generally I'm happy. Now, I will acknowledge that the Analogue Pocket gives you an absolutely fantastic version of the screen and the music, and it's so well recreated, but I think for most people, when it comes down to it, if you can play the game, you can play the game. Now, only certain games are available on the Evercade or the Nintendo Switch as alternatives, and I get that, but that is also where the Steam Deck will give you all the games you could ever play on the Analogue Pocket and thousands more. When you factor in the cartridge adapters for the Sega Game Gear, Neo Geo Pocket, Atari Lynx and Turbo Grafx, and the Analogue Pocket dock, and that if you want to use the dock you definitely will need a controller, but you may already have one. Either way, the cost of this is in the range of the Steam Deck, which, although is a different beast with a different form factor, it can play all of the games the Pocket can, plus PC games, and emulate tons of things beyond what the Pocket can. The Pocket can't give you Sega Saturn, Dreamcast or PS2 games or beyond, but the Steam Deck most certainly can, and so can a bunch of these other emulation devices. If you want to play your original carts, the Pocket will give you that, but in terms of emulation, as good as the Pocket is, it's not so much better at what it can emulate to say that it's better than having a Steam Deck. I have tried a few oddity carts on the console, including my Game Boy Advance video cartridge of the movie Shrek. It does come up with a warning saying it's not Game Boy Player compatible, but I can't remember if it did this just on a Game Boy Advance back in the day. But then it loaded fine on the Analogue Pocket, which was fun to see. Now, with Netflix in my pocket on my iPhone, I don't imagine I'll need this as the best method to watch Shrek in the future, but it's nice to see that it worked. I also tried a pirated copy of Pokemon Gold, which I got at a car boot sale back in the year 2000, and it was a surprise to see that this worked too. I may make a separate video on that cartridge one day, but it was a badly translated version of Pocket Monsters Gold, where all of the Pokemon had different names compared to their English language names. So for me, it was years before I knew what the actual Gold and Silver generation of Pokemon's actual names were. Also, midway through the game, you meet a Pokemon trainer who straight up tells you to F off. This was my biggest clue that it was pirated back in the day, and I had no way to capture this gameplay footage. But thanks to the Analogue Pocket, I look forward to finally showing the world what I told them Pokemon had said to me when I was 14. I also tried my Game Boy camera, and this works great. And what was so cool about it is that it will give me a way to capture those screenshots of those photos that I took 20 plus years ago, and I'll be able to have fun with it, because obviously, although you could print the images back in the day, you didn't actually have a way to back them up. Hello. So guys, have you ever wanted to use your Game Boy camera as your webcam? Well now, thanks to the Analogue Pocket and the Analogue Pocket dock, you can. But you'll also need a capture card, and you'll just have to play around with the lighting, because I am literally holding my phone here. Ooh. Look how long it takes to adjust. Look at this, as you move it around, look at my eyes, the way it lights up. This is actually a surprisingly cool camera. I just love the effect of it all. So, I don't know how well the lip sync is working on this, or if it's a little bit playing catch up. But, let's see if I can play around with the brightness and the contrast in this too. So I can make it brighter here, actually, that does improve things. I don't think it looks necessarily better. So yeah, this is using the Game Boy camera on the Analogue Pocket via the dock, via an game capture card, via HDMI into my computer, just so I can use it as a webcam. We have touched on the adapters and the dock a little bit, but let's talk about those more. The dock is a great device to purchase with the Pocket, but oh boy is it expensive. Now, I spent around £30 to get a dock for my Steam Deck, which lets me connect my Steam Deck to a HD TV, and I can also add USB controllers, keyboard, mouse, memory card, etc, all for £30. But if you want to do similar things on the Analogue Pocket, you can expect to pay something around £150. Yep, or it might be a little bit cheaper. You can get it about $90, but for me to get it in the UK in any timely fashion, it cost me a bunch of money. You see, the dock has its own FPGA tech built in, and isn't just ports to connect to HDMI and USB like the Steam Deck has. The Nintendo Switch dock may be similar in having some functionality in that it boosts performance to connect to an HD TV, but I think the Analogue Pocket even takes this further. So unfortunately, no, you can't just get a USB Type-C Steam Deck dock and then play Analogue Pocket on your TV. And there also, at least currently, aren't any third-party options. And with it being FPGA technology included, I don't expect there to be anytime soon. For me, as someone who wanted to use the Pocket to capture gameplay footage, the dock became a necessary evil, which, yes, is how I viewed the cost when considered. With the dock, you can use a variety of controllers, and for me, I'm very happy just using my Switch Pro controller with it, but I have also connected my PS4, PS5 gamepads, as well as my Xbox One controller. You can apparently also connect Wiimotes, although I don't know why you'd want to do that, and as well you can also connect Switch Joy-Cons and a bit of the 8-bit Do controllers that are available. Now, some people don't know if it's to say 8-bit Do or 8-bit Do, but I assume it's meant to sound like Nintendo, so that's why we say 8-bit Do rather than 8-bit Do. Also, it's just fun to say. The dock is weighty, but truthfully, when I've connected a controller to it via USB, I do feel a bit nervous that I'll tug and tip the Analogue Pocket out of the dock. It just sits in the dock and looks nice on a display level, but doesn't feel as snug and secure as a Switch in a Switch dock. I have a Game Gear adapter, so I can use my original Sega Game Gear carts on the Pocket, and this works just fine. Unlike when you put a Game Boy game into the console, the Game Gear games combined with the adapter will jut out the top of the console, which is a bit of a shame. I found that most of the games worked great, although I did find that I had to reinsert a couple of games a few times. I also experienced this with Game Boy games, but when it comes to using adapters and old cartridges, there's just more things that can go wrong at different points. I had the exact same thing happen with my review of the Retron 5 recently with the Game Gear adapter. I guess we're all just reaching the stage where some carts may start to fail if they're 25 or 30 years old. This is another reason why it is so important to have new hardware like those made by Analogue that gives you new ways to play original cartridges. A similar solution is also needed for the games themselves beyond just emulation, but I guess that will come another day. I don't yet have the adapters for the Atari Lynx Turbo Grafx and Neo Geo Pocket, but I do plan to pick them up in due course. Currently they're listed on the Analogue website as a set of 3, which I don't mind, but as I've never had an original PC engine or Turbo Grafx, I don't actually have any of the HuCard games that the console would use, so if I got that adapter, it would open up ways for me to start collecting PC Engine stuff, but as it is, I don't really need it. Neo Geo Pocket and Lynx I do have though, so this will be a way for me to try those old games in a new way, and it does give me that reason to start collecting PC Engine and Turbo Grafx games when I get the adapters. Unlike having the Analogue Duo, which was recently released, that will give you ways to play PC Engine and Turbo Grafx HuCards and also CDs. Now you can use emulation to get some of these older games from these consoles, like the PC Engine, working on it already, so heck, if you don't have the original HuCards, you could pick some up, but there is a way built in already just to be able to play those games. Now, the console is pocketable, or at least as pocketable as the original Game Boy was, and with its thinner form factor, that's a tongue twister, is actually slightly more pocketable. But whilst you'd usually pocket an old Game Boy console with a cart in, you probably won't want to do so if you have a Game Gear adapter and Game Gear game in. Truthfully, as most of the Game Boy and Game Boy Color games will stick out rather than being held in by that piece of plastic that would be on the original Game Boy, it does feel a little bit more dodgy that these could easily get knocked out of the pins of the Analogue Pocket and potentially cause some damage, so I wouldn't really pocket this system anyway, and I'd probably pop it in a portable carrying case. Look, I'm okay with the buttons on the Pocket, and I get that they are all left blank as various systems will have different button names and layouts, plus you can remap things, but I still would have preferred if there had been labels or color-coded A, B, X, Y or whatever on this. I think I'd have also preferred a larger start and select button and a slightly separated placement of the analog button just for ease of reach. Look, also, call me old-fashioned, but I also would have preferred if there was a volume dial rather than volume buttons, and an actual switch for the power rather than just a button which is very close to the volume buttons. Makes me a bit nervous that I'm accidentally going to switch it off. Likewise, I wish there was also a cover over the micro SD card slot, as I do feel like I'm accidentally going to press in on the micro SD card and shoot it across the room at some point. Yeah, the console is and has been available in various colours. I would have liked the glow-in-the-dark one personally, because I think that looks so cool, but alas, as I got mine secondhand, beggars can't be choosers, and I'm stuck with a white one that has a circuit board looking sticker design on it. I'm in two minds if I'd like to take this sticker off or if I like this look, but I'm not sure if I can remove it without leaving a horrible stickiness, so leave it I will for now. I've never quite understood why some people will buy multiple colour variants of the same console, but heck, each to their own. It's just with the Analogue Pocket, I know that it's a particularly expensive collection to build up. If you've got the black one, the white one, the glow-in-the-dark one, the translucent one, the ultraviolet one, I don't think that one exists, but it'd be cool if it did. Look, mine came with a screen protector and a sticker on it, and I'm happy enough with it as it is. Oh, speaking of the screen protector, if you don't have one on already, I would suggest you get one, as the screen is seen as the highlight of the console and you may want to protect it. Likewise, I'd suggest you get a carry case, as I wouldn't risk this thing just in a bag or my pocket for fear of damage. But now we reach the important question. Is the Analogue Pocket worth getting in 2024 and beyond? Or is it just a bundle of hype? Make no mistake, it definitely is a lot of hype, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it. Its main selling point to me is that it is a new and improved way to experience my original Game Boy and Game Gear cartridges. But whilst I'm happy to have this, I do question how much I was planning to revisit a lot of these older games these days anyway. I'm not sure it was enough to justify the cost of the Analogue Pocket, and that's just me speaking real. For most people, I'm certain there will be an emulation-based handheld which are much cheaper and available on Amazon or eBay with one-day delivery that will scratch whatever itch you have to play Game Boy games. And there are also a selection of these available on the Nintendo Switch online service anyway. As well as that, you can probably get an Evercade to get a bunch of these older games. And some of them were available on the 3DS. Now, unfortunately, unless you already have what you want on the 3DS, they're not available to get anymore with the close of the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U eShops. If you're in the market for the nostalgia and you want to play cartridges, then get an Analogue Pocket if you can afford it and are interested in collecting original carts. If you want the form factor and the great screen, this is also a great choice, even if you are going to take advantage primarily of the cores and ROMs on the system. For others who just want to play some handheld and retro home console games on the go, there are other options I'd suggest you look at first. The Analogue range of consoles either come in vertical Game Boy form or horizontal Game Boy Advance or PSP layouts, and they may or may not have thumbsticks. If they do, it usually means you have more consoles that can be emulated on them, so if you want N64, Dreamcast or PS1, then look at these rather than the Analogue Pocket. If you want just to spend your money once and not have multiple devices, I'd suggest you consider the Steam Deck or some other handheld portable PC. But the Steam Deck is the go-to and most well-known of these. The Steam Deck can give you all of the games that you'd want to play on your Analogue Pocket and infinitely more. But I get that this isn't always the point. Some will want that smaller system, the vertical orientation, and that there is something to be said about having too much choice. If you have a Steam Deck or a Switch, you're more likely to play modern games and 3D games and things that need teraflops. But if you have an Analogue Pocket, it's all going to be about that retro experience. It takes you back to an era where you only had so many games as you had cartridges to play, and you appreciated the graphics and controls and game designs of a simpler time. If you can afford it, then get one. I'd say the Analogue Pocket is an excellent device, but it's certainly a premium device and one I'd say has a specific audience. Look, if you were interested to go back in time and spend time with the classic era of gaming, and especially that classic portable era of gaming, and you have a bunch of cartridges, then absolutely get the Analogue Pocket. It's a great system for what it is, even if it is a little hard to come by and a little bit pricey. The prices aren't likely to go down anytime soon, just because there are such limited quantities, and even after a couple of years of when it originally came out, it's still in high demand. So I'd suggest you get one whilst you can, and that way, if they're not available, still being made later on, you'll avoid probably what will be through the roof prices. So that is going to wrap up this review of the Analogue Pocket, and we've taken a look at the dock, and we've taken a look at the Game Gear adapter, and all the other kind of things you can do with it, but not quite, because what I didn't look at today is I didn't look at Nanoloop, which is the software that you use to create your own music, and of course I didn't look at GB Studio, which is so that you can create your own Game Boy games, which is integrated somewhat into this, but obviously then you'll have to do stuff on the PC, and it's something I'm going to look at, and maybe we'll make another video later on down the line. I think I'm going to make lots of videos about the Analogue Pocket, or just the various games that I play on it, and show off how I'm getting on with the system. So if you haven't done so already, I'd really appreciate if you would smash that subscribe button on youtube.com/Geek Battle Gaming. As you'll see, we've got a bunch of different YouTube channels. Head over to www.xstreamed.tv if you want to have the article version of this deep dive and review. And until next time, make sure you stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now. Boom, and we're off the air.